They hit him so hard his knees gave out before the second blow landed. 3 men. Taking turns. No shouting. No rage. Just fists and force, and the flat, heavy sound of impact hitting a human body over and over and over again, until his arms stopped reaching up to protect his face, until his legs stopped trying to push him off the floor, until the only movement left in him was the slow, helpless folding of a man whose body had made its final decision. He was beaten until he was barely a shape on the concrete, and the men doing it never once broke their rhythm. Because this wasn't anger. This was work. The warehouse was cold and hollow, a single industrial light buzzing overhead, casting everything in that pale, harsh glow that makes shadows look permanent. The kind of place that has never been warm. The kind of place where sounds don't echo. They just disappear into the walls and stay there. And standing against the far wall, arms folded, watching everything, with eyes that didn't blink, was the Korean Mafia boss, Kang Jae-won, a man that entire criminal organizations crossed borders to avoid. The most disciplined, most feared syndicate leader across 3 countries. A man who never raised his voice because he never needed to. One signal from him and a room full of dangerous people moved without question. He wasn't watching the violence. He was watching the dying man's face, waiting for the moment when everything left to protect was gone. And sitting in a chair against the wall, hands folded, back straight, completely still, was her, Amara Solis. She wasn't muscle. She wasn't a soldier. She was something rarer than both. A woman who walked into the most dangerous rooms in the world and translated the secrets buried inside them. Languages most people had never heard spoken. Dialects so old they were almost dead. She could hear a man speak and tell you not just what the words meant, but what he was hiding underneath them. She had one rule that had kept her alive for 6 years. Translate everything, carry nothing. Walk in. Listen. Give them the words. Walk out clean. She had never broken it. Not once. Until tonight. Because when Park Dae-sung looked up from that floor, broken, finished, with nothing left to protect, he opened his mouth and spoke his last words in a dialect so rare that she was the only person in that room who understood a single syllable. She listened. She stood up. She walked to Jae-won and gave him almost everything. Almost. She turned for the door, and his voice followed her across the room. Quiet. Absolute. You hesitated. She walked out. But what she was carrying, and what that one withheld secret was about to do to both of them, neither the most dangerous man in 3 countries nor the woman who had spent 6 years feeling nothing was ready for. This is that story. If this is your first time here, welcome. This channel tells stories that stay with you. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And stay with me, because this one is only just beginning. Her phone rang before the car reached the end of the block. She already knew who it was. She picked up anyway. Baby. The voice was warm, familiar. The voice of the one person in the world who always picked up on the second ring. How'd it go? Amara looked out the window at the Seoul night. The Han River Bridge was lit up in the distance, its lights cutting pale lines across the black water. Beautiful. Indifferent. The city didn't know what had just happened in that building, and it didn't care. Fine, she said. You sound thin. You can't sound thin, Joe. I've been listening to your voice for 6 years. Trust me, you can. A pause. Warm and easy. There's a place on Itaewon Row that does that rice you like. I'm ordering for you. I'm fine, Joe. You're always fine. Another pause. Softer this time. Sleep. Well, baby. Good work tonight. The call ended. Amara stared at the screen for a long moment after it went dark. Josephine Crane had been booking her jobs for 6 years. She was the one who called to check if she was eating, the one who made dark jokes when a situation was tense enough to crack concrete, the warmest thing in Amara's life, and the only person she trusted without thinking about it. She put the phone in her pocket. She did not think about the name Park Dae-sung had said. She tried not to. She failed. She found out about the search the next morning. She walked into her apartment in Mapogu and felt it before she saw it. That particular stillness of a space that has been disturbed and carefully put back. Every drawer was closed. Every surface looked right. But the angle of her laptop was 2 centimeters off from where she'd left it. The book on her nightstand was upside down. Small things. Things only she would notice. They hadn't taken anything. They'd been looking for something. Which meant someone knew she'd been in that warehouse. Which meant someone knew what Park Dae-sung had said. Which meant she had a problem that wasn't going to solve itself. She packed a bag in 4 minutes. Cash from the lining of her winter coat. A second phone she kept for exactly this kind of situation. She didn't call anyone. She went dark. She moved through Seoul the way she'd learned to move through dangerous cities. No patterns, no habits. Cash for everything. Never the same street twice. She lasted 48 hours before he found her. He sat down across from her in a diner near Hongdae, like it was the most natural thing in the world. She hadn't heard him come in, hadn't heard the chair move. He was just there. Black jacket, coffee ordered without looking at the menu, eyes on her like he'd been looking at her for longer than the last 30 seconds. The diner smelled like old cooking oil and instant coffee. A small television. Above the counter played a news channel with the sound off. Outside, rain had started coming down hard against the window. "You're harder to find than you should be," Jaewon said. "That's a compliment?" "I'm not interested in compliments," she said. "Tell me what you want and what happens after this conversation." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. His knuckles had a faint scar across the right hand. Old, healed. The kind that comes from a specific kind of work done young. 12 hours after Park died, he said, someone put a contract on you, Cheonggang faction, the Vipers people. He watched her face. You know the name? She knew the name. Ryu Sang-chul. The Viper. A man whose violence wasn't discipline like Jaewon's. It was theatrical. Sadistic. The kind of man who hurt people long after the information was gone because he enjoyed the hurt itself. His contracts don't expire, Jaewon said. I know that. You withheld something in that room. Still not an accusation, a statement. The way a man speaks when he's already decided what to do and is simply filling in the remaining blanks. I don't know what it was, but whoever Park was connected to, they know you were there. They know you were the only one who understood him. He slid a card across the table. Just a number, handwritten. Think about it. He stood. He put money on the table for both coffees. He walked out into the rain without looking back. She stared at the card. She told herself she wasn't going to call. She called at 5 the next morning. But before she did, he came for her first. Director Kwon Tae-sik found her through official channels, Senior Law Enforcement, Task Force on Organized Crime. He had credentials, a pressed suit, and the practiced warmth of a man who had spent a career convincing frightened people to trust him. He knew about her mother. Which hospital? Which year? He knew about the first underground job she'd ever taken. Information she had told no one, not even Josephine. He called it thoroughness. He offered her witness protection, a way out, a clean life in a city that wasn't Seoul, with a name that wasn't hers, starting over. She almost took it. She called Jaewon instead. He met her in a parking structure near Yeouido, 3 levels underground. Gray concrete, humming fluorescent tubes, the smell of exhaust and wet tires. He opened a laptop on the hood of a black car and turned the screen toward her. It was surveillance footage. Kwon Tae-sik, 3 days before Park's death, sitting across a restaurant table from Park himself, handing him an envelope. That envelope, Jae-won said, contained the locations of 6 protected witnesses, including 2 children in a safe house in Seongbuk-dong. He let that sit. Kwon wasn't investigating Park. Kwon was Park's source. He's been feeding information to the rival faction for 3 years. Every move he's made against the syndicate has been cover for eliminating the evidence of what he actually did. He closed the laptop. Right now, you are evidence. Amara took the card Kwon had given her from her pocket. She tore it cleanly in half. "Where am I staying?" she said. The safe house was in a quiet building near Bukchon Hanak village, 6 floors up, clean lines, double-locked doors, windows that looked out over terracotta rooftops, and a sky that was doing its best Seoul gray. It should have felt safe. It felt like custody. Jae-won's men were everywhere, watching the door, watching the stairwell, watching her in the careful, professional way that was supposed to be invisible, and wasn't. She gave Jae-won the rest of what Park had said on the second day. All of it. The Yongsong Ledger, a master document containing the names, the deals, and the leverage information of every compromised official, every rival faction member, every government contact the syndicate had ever touched. It wasn't just a record. It was the reason certain people stayed in their lanes, the reason certain wars never started. Park said it's already been moved, she told him. Someone inside your circle moved it before he died. Jae-won went very still. 1 second. Just one. Then his face closed back down and he said, "We find it before they do." She pulled her chair closer to the table. "Then you need more than my voice," she said. "You need my brain." He looked at her for a moment. "I know," he said. "That was the beginning." Here is what nobody understood about Amara Solis. She wasn't just a translator. She was a reader of hidden things. The underground networks they were hunting used language the way other people used locks. Dialect-shifted Korean blended with Cantonese slang and East African trade terms in the same sentence. Codes built not from symbols but from what was left out. From which word a speaker chose when 3 words meant the same thing, and why that choice mattered. Without her, the investigation went nowhere. With her, it moved. She sat across from him at the safe house table night after night. Intercepted messages spread between them, the Bukchon rooftops dark beyond the window and the city a low hum underneath everything. She pushed back when he was wrong. He listened. Actually listened. The way men who are confident enough in themselves don't need to defend their first position. When she showed him something he'd missed, he said so. She didn't expect that. She adjusted. Then Sorel came back. She'd known Sorel Mabunda for 4 years, Pan-African broker, cultured, warm, the kind of man who remembered how you took your coffee and made dark situations feel survivable just by being in them. He reached out through a mutual channel, said he'd heard she was in danger, said he wanted to help. He gave them a real lead. One of Kwon's buried financial accounts, hidden under 4 layers of shell companies registered out of the Cayman Islands. They followed it. It paid off. Josephine vouched for him when Amara checked. "Baby, I've known Sorel for years. He's solid. You can breathe around that man." So she breathed. She brought him carefully into the orbit of the investigation. He was useful. He was warm. He reminded her of the version of her professional life that had felt, at least sometimes, like something other than survival. She made one mistake in that moment. She told him too much. 4 days into working with Sorel, Jae-won set a tablet on the table in front of her and said nothing. She read it. An intercepted communication. Encrypted but cracked by Jae-won's intelligence team. Sent by Sorel to a contact she didn't recognize. Yet. The message confirmed that Amara Solis possessed the untranslated portion of Park Dae-sung's last words. It had been sent 2 hours after she'd spoken to Sorel privately. She read it twice. She put the tablet down. "Is he still in the building?" she asked. "Yes. I want to be in the room." Jaewon looked at her for a moment. "Okay." They confronted Sorel together, in a small room on the ground floor with a single bare bulb and a metal table and the muffled sound of Seoul traffic somewhere above them. He didn't deny it when they put the communication in front of him. The warmth drained out of his face, not replaced by something hard, just replaced by something honest. Tired. He'd been contracted by someone above the Viper, someone neither of them had fully identified yet. His job: confirm she had the last words, then close the loose end. He looked at Amara directly when he said it. "You were always too good at this job for your own safety," he said. "That was always going to cost you something." She said nothing. She walked out before it ended. She sat in a hallway with white walls and a cold linoleum floor, and she thought about what Josephine had said. "He's solid. You can breathe around that man." Joe had never been wrong about a person. Not once. In 6 years. She picked up her phone. Called the number. Joe picked up on the second ring, devastated sounding, horrified, saying all the right things. Amara listened to every word. Not for what was being said, for the texture underneath it. She hung up. She sat in the cold hallway and didn't finish the thought that was forming. She chose not to. Jaewon found her there. He sat down next to her. Not in front of her. Not above her. Right next to her on the floor at the same level. He didn't say anything. After a long moment, his hand found her shoulder. It stayed there 1 moment longer than it needed to. Neither of them addressed it. She found Madame Chen Wei through a single word. They were 3 weeks deep in the investigation. Jaewon had brought Chen into the loop as a neutral intelligence resource, the underground's most trusted information broker, operating out of a private office in a glass tower in Gangnam. Chen was 60, elegant in the specific way that decades of precise calculation makes a person elegant. She had been selling verified intelligence to every major faction in Asia for 20 years. Nobody had ever caught her playing both sides. Nobody had been listening the right way. Amara was sitting across from her in the Gangnam office, floor-to-ceiling glass, the whole of Seoul spreading south toward the mountains, the air smelling faintly of sandalwood. When Chen used a phrase, a Cantonese idiom, old, specific. The kind of expression that only lived inside a particular underground faction that had operated out of Hong Kong in the 90s. A faction that had dissolved before most people in this business were working. A faction that Josephine had introduced Amara to at the very beginning of her career. Amara's face didn't move, but something behind her eyes shifted. She finished the meeting. She was pleasant and professional. She said goodbye in Cantonese and watched Chen smile at the fluency. 2 hours later, she was sitting across from Jaewon at the safe house table. "Madame Chen isn't neutral," she said. She never was. She laid out the thread, the idiom, the faction, the specific linguistic fingerprint that only someone with deep roots in that particular network would carry. Jaewon's team spent 72 hours confirming it. They confirmed everything. Chen hadn't been brokering information. She'd been engineering the conditions that made information valuable. She'd tipped the Cheonggang faction about Park's interrogation. She'd arranged the original contract on Amara. Not to kill her, but to push her toward Jaewon, because Amara's specific linguistic ability was the only key left that could locate the ledger. She'd been running Quan and the Viper simultaneously, managing both sides like instruments in an orchestra only she could hear. They moved on her on a Tuesday. Clean, fast, no room for her to run the calculations she'd spent 20 years running. Madame Chen looked at the evidence assembled against her. She looked at Jaewon across the table. She made the calculation she always made. What gives me the best long-term odds? She negotiated her exit. Terms accepted. Leverage stripped. Network exposed. The architecture she'd spent 2 decades building, dismantled in an afternoon. She walked out of that room smaller than she'd entered it, but still walking. And for a woman whose entire power was invisibility, being seen clearly in the correct proportion to what she actually was, that was its own kind of ending. Somewhere in the middle of all of it, something shifted between them and neither of them named it. It moved through small things. The way he handed her coffee before she asked. The way she'd stopped bracing herself when he entered a room. The stakeout in a car on a rain-soaked street in Mapogu where they sat for 2 hours without speaking, and it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just 2 people in the same space, working the same problem, comfortable enough in each other's silence to leave it alone. She noticed it. She didn't act on it. He noticed it too. She could tell by the way he didn't act on it either. The power outage happened on a Thursday night. The whole block went dark. A grid failure that took the Bukchon neighborhood with it. Emergency lights flickered on inside the safe house, dim and orange, and the big room became small the way rooms do when the light changes. They were the only 2 people on that floor. They stayed where they were, rain against the window. The distant sound of Seoul going on without them. A single candle someone had left on the kitchen counter, burning low, throwing unsteady light across the table between them. He told her about his father. Not the crime. The man before the crime. A father who borrowed from people who didn't lend the way banks lend, who disappeared one morning when Jaewon was 15 and left behind a debt. A younger brother. And a mother who worked herself into the ground trying to cover both. He'd walked into a room at 15 that most people don't walk into until they're much older, if at all. He'd offered the only thing he had, himself, his capability, his willingness to do what needed doing. He'd never found the exit. "Is your brother safe?" she asked. "He teaches mathematics in Busan. He has a daughter. She's 4. A pause. "He doesn't know this world exists." She was quiet for a moment. Then she told him about 22. About a hospital waiting room at Seoul National University Hospital. A fluorescent light that flickered every 12 seconds. A bank account with nothing in it. And a set of skills and a contact who knew someone. About the first room? The choice that was supposed to be temporary and never was. "I stopped being surprised by that a long time ago," she said. The candle threw light across the side of his face. He was looking at her the way he'd looked at Park Dae-sung in that warehouse. Not at the surface, at what was underneath. "We're the same kind of person," he said. "Not romantic. A recognition. The kind that passes between 2 people who've been living in the same exile without knowing it." "I know," she said. And the room was very quiet, and he kissed her. It wasn't soft. It wasn't performed. It was the kind of kiss that is just honest, the kind where both people are fully themselves and not trying to be anything else. She kissed him back. Not because she'd decided to, because everything she'd been deciding against for 3 weeks had simply run out of reasons. 8 days later, she broke. She was using access to his secured files for a research task, cross-referencing property records against the Ledger investigation, when a reference stopped her cold. An operation, 7 years ago, a location she recognized, a timeline that aligned with a loss she hadn't thought about directly in years, because thinking about it directly was how people in her profession stopped functioning. She followed the thread. She followed it to a name, someone she had lost. The syndicate's connection to what happened to that person wasn't direct. It never was in this world. Nobody made one clean decision that killed one person. There were layers, decisions and operations and cascading consequences, and somewhere in the middle of all those layers was the organization Jaewon ran. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she closed the files. packed what she had, left the safe house before anyone thought to stop her. She went to Josephine. Joe's apartment was in Yongsan-gu, 4 floors up, overlooking a narrow street lined with convenience stores and pojangmacha tents, their orange tarps lit from within in the dark. The apartment smelled like the candle Joe always burned, bergamot, something underneath it that Amara had never been able to name but had always associated with safety. Tea was already on when she arrived, of course it was. She sat at the kitchen table and talked. Joe listened the way only people who love you completely listen, not preparing the next thing to say, just receiving all of it. When Amara finished, Joe folded her hands around her own cup and said, "Some men cost too much, baby, and you've paid enough." Amara sat with that. She stayed 2 hours. Joe hugged her at the door, longer than usual and more carefully, like she was aware of something Amara wasn't. Amara was almost through the door when her eye caught something on Joe's desk. A phone, newer than Joe's usual one, different model entirely. And beside it, visible at the edge, a printed page, coordinates she recognized from deep in the ledger investigation. A location she and Jaewon had discussed privately. Just the two of them. 48 hours ago. Amara's eye moved across it. Her mind registered it with the automatic precision of a brain trained to notice exactly these things. She kept walking. She said, "Good night." She took the stairs. She stood on the Yongsan-gu street in the cold air with the pojangmacha lights glowing orange behind her, and she did not finish the thought. She chose, deliberately, not to. She solved the ledger's location 3 days later, alone. 3 notebooks, a laptop. Strong coffee from a place on the corner that opened at 6. No sleep. The shell company that owned the property where the ledger was hidden had documents encoded in a way that every intelligence system she'd had access to had read as bureaucratic language. Standard. Routine. Unremarkable. But she wasn't reading it as a machine. She was reading it as someone who'd spent 8 years studying the way specific criminal networks hid meaning inside plain language, the grammatical structures, the specific word choices, the way certain nouns were swapped for others in a pattern that was too consistent to be random. She knew this pattern. She'd learned it 6 years ago from an underground cabal operating out of Incheon. The first cabal Josephine had ever introduced her to. She sat with that for a long time. Then she let herself finish the thought she'd been refusing for days, and when it was fully formed, clear, complete, and terrible, she picked up her phone. She didn't call Josephine, she called Jaewon. She told him everything, the address, the encoding system. Who had taught her to recognize it? All of it. She said Josephine's name in the same flat, precise voice she used when accuracy was the only thing that mattered. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Are you all right?" She almost laughed. Almost. "Not yet," she said, "but let's finish this." She went to Joe's apartment in the morning. Joe opened the door with the same warmth she'd opened it with for 6 years. Tea went on. They sat at the kitchen table with the Yongsan-gu street quiet below the window, the early morning light coming in thin and pale across the linoleum floor. Amara looked at her for a long moment. Then she said the property address. Just the address. Nothing else. Josephine set her cup down. She looked at Amara, and she exhaled. Not surprise, not performance. The sound of a woman setting down something she had been carrying for a very long time. She didn't lie. 12 years ago, Joe had a son named Marcus. 24. A driver. Wrong car, wrong night. Caught in the middle of a Yongsong syndicate enforcement operation he had nothing to do with. He died in a Mapo-gu street that wasn't his, in a conflict that had nothing to do with him, and his name appeared in no official report because the operation was unofficial and the syndicate had paid its way clean. Jo had spent 2 years pursuing justice through every legitimate channel available to her. She'd been ignored, redirected, quietly discouraged by people with the power to act who had every reason not to. At the end of 2 years, she had nothing, so she built something else. She found Amara at 22, brilliant, broke, multilingual, and newly desperate enough to walk through a door that didn't open back the other way. Jo had cultivated her, placed her, made sure the right jobs were available and the right rooms were accessible. 6 years of careful engineering until Amara was exactly where she needed her to be. Inside the Yongsong Syndicate's inner circle, close enough to find what Jo had spent a decade looking for. "I told myself I'd keep you safe," Jo said. "I told myself the love and the plan were both true, that the love made the plan acceptable." Amara looked at her hands. "And Sorel?" she said. Josephine's jaw tightened. "I didn't know what he'd been contracted for." "But you knew enough to ask harder questions?" A long silence. "Yes," Jo said. "I knew enough." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the Yongsangu street was starting to wake up. The first sounds of the day. A delivery truck. Someone's radio. "I need to go," Amara said. Jo looked at her hands. "I know." Amara stood. She put on her coat. She paused at the door. She didn't say anything. She left. The final night was a warehouse in Incheon, a property on the industrial waterfront, registered under a shell company name that had meant nothing to anyone until Amara broke the code. It was hidden inside. The Han River was visible in the distance, its surface gray and flat under an overcast sky. The smell of salt and rust came in through gaps in the walls. Kwon Tae-sik made his last play there. He'd run out of cover. The paper trail Amara and Jae-won had assembled over 4 weeks had stripped away every layer of his protection. He was exposed, desperate. And desperate men with resources are the most dangerous version of anything. He came with 12 men and a timeline that had run to its end. Jae-won came with more. The collision was fast and precise and loud in the specific way that these things are loud. Sharp, functional, purposeful. And then it was over. And the building was quiet, and the air smelled like concrete dust and the sea. But Kwon wasn't the last problem. Josephine arrived through a side entrance while the chaos was still settling. She had her own copy of the address. Of course she did. She'd been monitoring Amara's work for 6 years. She'd known the moment Amara found it. She moved through the building like a woman who had been waiting 12 years for this room. She knew exactly where the ledger was. She moved toward it, and she didn't stop. She found Amara at the ledger first. They stood facing each other across a secured compartment in the wall of a back room. The ledger inside it, a hard drive in a metal case. Everything Jo had spent 12 years working toward. Jo raised the gun. It was the worst image Amara had ever seen. Not because of the gun, because of the hands holding it. Hands that had handed her tea. Hands that had fixed her collar. Once, years ago, before a job. Just because they were there and it needed fixing. Those hands, holding a gun on her. Jae-won came through the door behind Amara. He took in the room in 1 second. And then he did something she would think about for a long time afterward. He walked forward until he was standing directly between Jo's gun and Amara. No speech, no announcement. He simply moved until he was the thing standing between her and the bullet. Josephine looked at him, the man she'd spent 12 years building a weapon to destroy. Standing in front of the woman she'd spent 6 years building as that weapon. The gun didn't waver. And then it did. It dropped. Slowly. Until it was pointed at the floor. Jo looked past Jae-won's shoulder at Amara. She said something in Korean. The specific phrase she'd taught Amara years ago in the early days, when Amara was young and learning and Jo was patient with everything. A phrase that sat somewhere between "you" were always the point. And I should never have made you the plan. A shot came from across the room. One of Kwan's last men, cornered, firing at anything that moved. Josephine fell. Amara crossed the room before the thought of moving had finished forming. She caught her. She held her on the cold concrete floor between the ledger and the door, and Joe looked up at her with eyes that were already beginning to go somewhere else. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. She was gone before the room went fully quiet. The ledger sat 3 feet away, untouched. Kwan was handled by Jaewon in the way these things were handled. Quiet. Final. The kind of ending that would look, to the civilian world above them, like something other than what it was. And then, there was nothing left. Just silence, and the smell of salt water through the broken walls, and a gray Incheon dawn starting to show through the high windows. That specific gray that makes everything look like it happened a long time ago. She was sitting on the floor when the last sound faded. Not against a wall, not with her back to anything, just on the floor, in the middle of that room, with her hands in her lap, the same way she'd sat in the warehouse the night this all started. Jaewon sat down next to her, not across from her, not standing above her, next to her, on the floor, at exactly her level. They stayed like that for a while. Then she asked him about the operation. 7 years ago. The name she'd found in the files, the loss she'd carried without looking at directly. He told her. All of it. Not a version shaped to protect himself. What the operation was. What his organization's role had been. The chain of decisions that led to what happened. He didn't soften it. He didn't ask her to understand it. She sat with it. The gray light moved through the windows. Somewhere outside, Incheon was starting up. The first trucks on the waterfront road, the distant sound of a ferry horn, the city, doing what cities do regardless of what happened in their buildings the night before. I'm not ready to let that go, she said. I know, he said, but I'm not leaving. He reached for her hand. She looked at it, just for a moment. Open, offered. Nothing demanded. She took it. He turned toward her. She turned toward him. He kissed her, careful, honest, asking for nothing more than what she was choosing to give. She kissed him back. Outside, the ferry horn sounded again across the gray Incheon water. Neither of them moved. If this story stayed with you, you already know what to do. Like, subscribe, leave a comment telling me which character you didn't trust from the beginning, and come back. Because the next story is already waiting in the dark, and it's even better than this one.